Yeah, welcome. Here we go. Yeah, welcome to the Salesprenuer Podcast, Taylor. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm I'm super excited to have you. I think that you're one of the people that helps embody what we want to get out of this, and the story we really want to tell, which is people that are in sales that have done it for 5 to 10 years, but are also looking for a way out. And so Ty and I had that conversation with you last week. We learned about your journey, 10 years killing it in sales, and then what led to buying a business and really like the cool things that happened in the last 2 years. You mentioned it being two of the best years of your life, which is really exciting.
Direct
But
quote,
I'd
I
love
can't
to,
remember.
yeah, something similar. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I'm just teasing.
But I'd love to like let you introduce yourself.
Okay. So again, thanks guys. Appreciate you having me on. And you might ask more questions, but I can kind of just share a little bio. So Taylor Brown, one of the owners of Elite Turf Supply, Turf Impressions. There's a few other companies that we have called Ventures, as well as Dynamic Deck Pro. So a few different businesses and things that I've gotten into since exiting the tech scene, if you will. But prior to that, had a nice 10-year run with a few different tech companies. I'm sure we'll get into some of those, but was a great experience. Sales obviously is the greatest job you can have in the world. You learn a whole lot about life and who you are and what you're passionate about. And fortunately for me, taking a lot of good experiences, some good experiences, some not so good experiences, and I would take those things have led me to where I'm at today.
That's awesome. And so Clay, hit it right on the head about kind of your overarching story. First off, I want to shout out, you played basketball at UVU, so you're a real athlete here, have some real athletic background. I wanted to shout you out for that. I know you're being humble. But then two, I want to talk about your sales background as a whole in tech. If you could just go kind of piece by piece, you don't have to cover in depth everything from your LinkedIn, but most of our niche, if you will, is going to be people in tech sales or have just recently gotten out. And so cover for me, some of your journey. I know there was a VP of sales stint in there, some time with Divy that you had was a very successful company. So kind of outline some of that for me.
I will, and appreciate you bringing up my not so illustrious college basketball career. And now someone somewhere is Googling the unimpressive stats, but no, that was a great experience. And I think my journey might be similar to a lot of people's. I was very much involved in sports, had all the aspirations of going pro that never came to fruition. But when I graduated, I think sales just was the natural way to go. There's my dad sells cars, my brother sells with the Jazz, and I've seen a lot of good that have come from it. And so I thought naturally that would be a good fit for me, serving a mission, right? A lot of sales going on there. And so knowing that and being in our community of Utah, a lot of different opportunities. So I was able to get on it, was then InsideSales.com. I've rebranded since then, but started off as the inbound SDR, not even outbound. They only trusted me with inbound hot leads, which was so fun to start my career off. And obviously within that, a lot of good things happened, worked hard, showed up very early in the morning to be able to capture the leads that had come in overnight and whatnot. And a few months after that, was able to get promoted, went to another company called Divy, was at Divy for a minute. Same thing there. Started as an account executive, worked my up until at the end being a VP of sales, which was an invaluable experience. Learned a lot about myself, things that I liked, things that I didn't like. And from that experience was introduced to an opportunity at Divy. Maybe some of those that are listening know the name Divy, now is as Bill, but was there pre-Series A, was one of the first sales reps there, and saw and caught the vision and was super excited about the opportunity there. So again, just from a lowly AE, and in that position, I knew I wanted to be and stay as an individual contributor. Liking more of my own schedule, being able to control a lot of the things that are in my control, meaning I get all the credit for the success, but I also, I can go home knowing that if I failed, it was all on me and didn't, rely on anybody else for the successes or the failures. And then towards the end of my time at Divy, maybe we'll get into that story or not, and in terms of what I think was the stepping stone that pushed me to want to go venture off and do my own thing. And I can kind of just shed light into it now, but obviously, Divy was acquired for, I think, $2.5 billion in 2021. And for me personally, it was awesome, but it was also, I had put a lot of work into that. And at the end of it, when I found how much in terms of equity or what I was going to be receiving, I was probably one of the hardest or worst days of my sales, maybe my personal life altogether, knowing how much I had helped build and create to what, I was getting compared to others. And so you can kind of tie that event to wanting to like kind of push myself throughout this, during this time I'd been introduced, or I'd got a putting green installed at my house. But from that event, being in sales, going through an exit, I knew that, man, I don't have $2.5 billion in my pocket, and I'd sure like to have it. So it kind of pushed me to go off and do my own thing.
Go ahead, Clay. Sorry.
No, Taylor, that's super interesting. I didn't realize that you were at Divvy so early, and I'm really curious about that as well, because you were there, you said pre-series A all the way through acquisition in 3 to 4 years. There's a lot that happens at a company going through all that growth. I'm really curious to hear from you what that was like, because I'm sure a lot of the things you saw from the startup actually translate to what you're doing now, as far as seeing a hyper growth company, as far as seeing it from the little baby operations to landing massive accounts. What do you do as far as marketing, branding, sales operations, all of those different things, and in a short amount of period of time? It's you're a part of a select group of people that get to experience that. And so could you help me understand what was it like in the early days at Divvy, and then all the way through the acquisition?
I mean, it was, you could say or label it as like kind of the best of times. Obviously, not a lot of people get to experience what I went through, and some might. And I think up to that point, it would have been considered the highlight of my career, right? And and in that short period of time, 10 years in sales, like I was very fortunate and felt and was super proud to have gone through that. In the beginning, just like you might see with a lot of startups, right? There's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of, not to say rah-rah, but what was different is like you saw the product market fit, if you will. And just in your calls and in the reactions that you're getting with customers and businesses, I knew that this thing had some legs to it, that it could be something really big. And so obviously just being a part of that, and for a company that scales that fast, that big, you're also introduced to so many cool people. And again, companies don't get to be acquired if they don't have some of the best and brightest people working there. And I could say that there were so many people that I grew to love, still am close with. But the lessons are invaluable, right? Change is frequent, right? You expect things to change, if not monthly, quarterly, and just the ability to adapt, right? In today's market, speaking from the tech scene, you see a lot of companies raising money because they have to, right? It's a race. And so that was fun. Never a dull moment. Super appreciative of all of those experiences. And all the way through A, B, C, D, and finally acquisition, which was a lot of fun.
We'll get into more of like the transition and what you're doing now. And I don't want to give away too much in how successful you've been, but Clay hit it, but I just want to double click on this again. Like very few reps ever get a chance to see a company through that long. Do you feel like that race that you said, or the the ability to grow really fast, do you feel like that's helped specifically in your day to day now with scaling what are basically two different companies to very valuable enterprise value very fast? Do you feel like those correlated at all, or do you feel like you had those skills beforehand? Did you kind of helped maybe a little bit, and then you went and did your own thing, or tell us more about that there?
Yeah, shoot, Clay. I know I totally just didn't answer your question last time, so let me try my best to answer it now. I would say absolutely. And I think maybe as the podcast states, like even though I was an account executive, if you will, right? I don't know what the perception or how people perceive themselves that are in account executive roles, but even though at a prior company I was the VP of sales, and for some people that like to look at titles, like they could have thought, well, he's made it. To be honest, I hated it. I just didn't like it. Like my paycheck being responsible for the success or failures of other people, and hurt relationships. And kind of learned like, man, I want to be able to control a lot more of what is going on, specifically my paycheck. And so in that role, moving to Divy, even though I was labeled as an account executive, there was still like an entrepreneurial spirit about how to go about my territory, my domain, if you will, right? How I would prospect into people and be creative. And I was given that freedom to do those things. What's different now, jumping over to the ownership side and being an entrepreneur, I've learned a lot more. Not to say that things didn't prepare me for that, the hustle, because now as you start your own business, you're looking to acquire customers, and there's ways, speaking specifically of like the prospecting and ways to attract new customers that still carry over to this day. But from the finance side and operations side, that's a whole different game that I'm grateful to now be going through and experiencing, because the life of an entrepreneur, owning your company, in my opinion, is a lot more fulfilling, a lot more challenges. But there's a lot of good that can come with that too. But there are definitely some things that carried over along the way.
Yeah, for sure. You've definitely evolved since that point, which is awesome, and that's good to hear. That's natural. But it sounds like it was impactful on your career trajectory, which is awesome. Kind of quickly, the last thing I wanted to touch on with Divvy, and then we can move past this. But you said they exited for, what was the number of billions? 2.5 billion.
I believe it was 2.5 with a B.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to get into specific numbers here, but you obviously had equity going from Series A, pre-Series A to Series D to a publicly traded company. With the exit, like, was it 5 figures, 6 figures? Like, help people in tech understand what their equity actually means. You can kind of pivot into why starting your own thing was actually more interesting, even after you successfully done what a lot of people in tech dream of.
Sure. So I'm a big believer, as I'm sure many are, right, that everything happens for a reason. And at the time, and I've probably shared too much or have been too vocal, at least on LinkedIn, some of the things that I posted. So if you want to go back and read them, go for it. But in hindsight, like, there's a level of maturity. I had been there a long time. I'd done a lot, was at the top of the boards and different metrics. And the day they announced the acquisition, what you would think would be one of the best days of your career, and I've touched on this already, but ended up being a really hard day. Along the way, and maybe those of you who are listening, you hear about like, hey, you're given options or whatever it is, right? But they always tell you to keep it to yourself. And I was a good employee. I kept those numbers to myself, thinking that I had, if not enough or more than some. Come to find out that day, numbers are just flying on the floor. And it was really hard because you see like a BDR manager over here, or some person that's been here 3 months and I've been there 5 years. Just the discrepancy or the amounts that I was going to be walking away with. So it was not life-changing by any means. There was some, and enough to kind of help me acquire the turf business, which I'm sure we'll get into. But anyways, just if there's one thing that I've learned, obviously know that, like, again, people who really have stakes in those companies, everybody is self-interested. And that the sooner everybody can realize that everybody's self-interested, I think it makes it easier to understand why certain decisions are made or whatnot. And so, yeah, I mean, that number is huge. And some people may think or would have thought like, yeah, he walked away a millionaire. Far from it. But I am grateful and for that experience, because had I not had that feeling and had maybe walked away with $1 million, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today in terms of wanting to go start my own business, acquire business. And like I said, it was kind of happening all at the same time, if you will. Around the time the acquisition was around the same time that maybe this is a transition or segue into our story, but it was about the same time that I was looking to get a putting green installed at my house. And why don't you guys just tell me if you want me to tell the story or if you have an actual question? I can do either.
No, you can definitely. That's exactly where we wanted to go, and I think it's really interesting to hear from you as well on how the equity piece plays out, even in a big acquisition. I just looked it up. May 2021, Bill.com acquires Divvy for 2.5 billion. And so many people think, oh, okay, you must have been a millionaire out of that, right? You were there pre-Series A. You built probably a lot of systems and processes, playbooks, landed key accounts, but ultimately you probably walked away with enough to buy a brand new car. And that's best case scenario. You were literally one of the very first person's there. And so I think it's a good lesson for everyone. And even like you said, I'm sure that that day was one of the hardest times, but also the overall experience of Divvy taught you a lot, which I think is good for people like Ty and I, or even listeners who are in sales right now that are learning how business works, how to be an entrepreneur while working a W-2. And so I think it's cool that you were able to experience all those things, experience a massive growth, put that on your story, build the confidence that you needed to do, or the confidence you needed to have so that you could make this next transition. And so then that kind of leads us into you buy this putting green, or you have somebody come out to your house to give you a putting green. I also know that during this time you had to transition to Spiff. Can you kind of like walk us through like the timeline of things? So Bill.com gets acquired. You get the putting green. You're going over to Spiff. Can you kind of walk us through the timeline of things and where your head was at during all of that?
Sure can. And there's hopefully I can get through this quick because there's a lot to the story. What I would say, just to button up, like for any for any person in a sales role that's wanting to do something on the side or is in the middle of, like, my story is great, right? But the likelihood of somebody getting on with the company pre-Series A all the way through an acquisition, I don't know what the percentages are. They're probably very low, right? And I hate to say this, but I've just seen it. That like a lot of times, like companies, you can't help, right? They're competing for talent. So whatever the sales pitch is, I call it like drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will, right? Like I said, if you can just be honest and aware of like, look, at the end of this thing, if an exit or something of that extent happens, primarily it's going to benefit those founders, right? Not that you can't have a blast along the way, but the reality is that if you have financial dreams, aspirations tied to a dollar amount, more than likely it's going to be tied to like passive income things or going out and actually starting or building your own business. That's just the reality. And that was a lesson that kind of struck hard. Now, I didn't like from that day of the acquisition, that day decide like, oh, I'm out. I'm going to go start my own business. But like I said, I think there's a bigger purpose behind things and why they happen. So around that time, I believe it was right around it was probably towards the end of 2020. Everybody's at home. And I have a nice little lot that I love to go out in my backyard and just chip balls. Like that's kind of like my pastime, stress relief, whatever you call it, right? And I had seen like online or something like an artificial turf putting. And I was like, that's what I want. So I started inquiring, and being in the tech space, like you fill out a form, you wait for your phone, right? Someone's going to call me. Truth of it is, I don't think I got a call until about 5 days later. And I was shocked. I was like, well, what the heck? Like, why did it take so long? And then I didn't understand square footage and whatnot. So I guessed what my square footage was. And he's like, oh, that's 80 grand. And I was like, what? Just what? So I'm kind of just like stirring over, like, do I want a putting green? Like exploring some options. And then one day I'm on KSL and I find this ad, if you will, where it had some great pictures, but no website, no social media. So against like my own intuition, I was like, yeah, I'm going to call him. So I called the guy, and to my surprise, he picked up. We had a great conversation, talked about turf. The very next day, he came to my house, showed me these samples, brought his installer, and just had a really good conversation where I got educated on what turf is today. Saw some pictures. I was like, yeah, sign me up. Let's do it. And what was unique, I mentioned that we were at home. So I watched them do the whole install. And it really kind of like two thoughts came to my mind. One is like, dang, that looks so good. And the second one is like, dang, I know how much I just paid for that, and it didn't take that long to do. So the wheels start turning like, maybe this could be like a side thing. By this point, I had become friends with the previous owner, or the owner at the time. And, I told my wife, I was like, oh, we should go start a turf installation company. She looked at me and she's like, well, you're not that smart. Why don't you just go ask the other guy about partnering up or doing something of that nature? And taking that humble pie, it's exactly what I did. I called him. And again, like that to me, like I'm very like, I won't get emotional, but like to me, like taking the step to actually call somebody, like thinking about like starting, like that was a step, right? That's an action. And sometimes actions lead to some cool things, right? As I'll get into, but we started talking. He was open to the idea. It was a side hustle for him at the time. He had a full-time gig actually working at KSL. So we started talking. And then one day out of the blue, this is during the summer months, people on vacation, I get a call and he's like, hey, what do you think about buying the business? And I was like, wait, what? Buying? Me? I didn't know how to react or how to respond. Not even thinking like, what's this company even worth? And where the story really takes off is I have a brother-in-law that I'm very close with, and he and his other business partner are very successful entrepreneurs. And I called him. They happened to be in the car at the same time, and I just was like, "Hey, I got this idea. I'm thinking of this. Like, would you be like open to like maybe just consulting me as to like what this company might be worth?" Da da da. And so the more we started looking into it, the more it became clear and apparent like this is an opportunity. And so together, the three of us, we actually bought the company and decided and saw really early on the opportunity to take the business, which at the time was called Elite Turf Supply. And again, the owner at the time was kind of dabbling in both worlds. He was doing some installs, but he was also selling some turf on the side. And so we saw the opportunity to go all in on the supply, but also all in and creating an install company, which we did. And as I mentioned earlier, it's called Turf Impressions. So from there, things just kind of took off. And it was about that time, there's a story I talk about being put on a PIP, a performance improvement plan, as you like to say. If you want all the nice details, go ahead and go read LinkedIn. But
this at Spiff?
This was at Divy. Shout out Divy. Towards the
Okay.
end, like once the acquisition happened, I think I stayed on a few more months, if you will. Changes inevitable, right? Bad fortune, whatever you want to call it. Right? Things just happen in the course of a year, 2 years, whatever it is, right? We've all, and if you haven't, you'll experience ups and downs, highs and lows. And I was kind of dumbfounded, to be honest with you. At the time, I was number one all time. Had done some really good things for the company and was served a PIP. And excuse the emotion, but I wasn't here for it, to be honest with you. And on the heels of the acquisition and just certain things that were changing, I was like, I'm going to go do something else. And there's another part of the story where I got some good stories. I'll tell you. In the middle of COVID, I was actually laid off by Divy. If you can hear the 2-year-old in the background, I apologize. But I was laid off. They let me go. And anyways, I was back a few weeks later, obviously. But when I was let go, I actually had some conversations with Spiff, and ultimately I came back to Divy for a while, but I never forgot some of those people I met. And anyways, ended up making the change to Spiff. And I kept the turf thing under wraps, if you will. Even though we had acquired the company, I was still full-time with Spiff. And anyways, did my thing, made President's Club at Spiff first year with the plan that I was eventually going to go full-time.
Cool. That's an awesome story. It's super valuable for people in sales like us to understand. I think a lot of people think doing their own thing means quitting their W-2 and stop having income, or like stop having any source of income and just going, because that's the romanticized entrepreneur story. It's really cool to see that you kind of did it gradually, and you might recommend it to people, you might not recommend it to people. I don't know. It's your experience. What would you say about that time? And I mean, was it because you had a family? Like, tell us kind of your mental state and the psychology behind doing that slowly.
Yeah, I have I don't know if it's a hot, I think some people like this take and some people don't, but I think if I were a manager and I had reps underneath me, if they had a side hustle, I would be all for it. I actually gave a presentation at one of our QBRs while I was at Divy why every single person should have a side hustle, because it teaches you, like, again, time management, meaning your time is more valuable when you're on doing work things. Like, you really got to get to it so that when you're doing something else, you can be all in there, right? And I mean, shoot, I don't think the tech leaders of the world like me too much, but like, I think you can get your job done easily in, let's say, 4 to 5 hours, right? That's mine. All the time wasted on Slack, all the other tools, all the other BS. Like, I feel like there's ways that if you're dialed in, you can accomplish whatever your W-2 is in a shorter period of time, so that you have time that you can put towards other type things, passion projects. So I am of the belief everyone, if passionate about it, should have a side hustle, because it teaches you a lot about time management. You're growing, you're learning things that you can then apply back to your W-2, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And maybe this is my worldview, Taylor, but I'm generally risk averse. And that's what I love about sales is I get that itch. I can have that entrepreneurial bug and go chase revenue and go do my job, but also I'm able to save money and like build something on the side so that when I decide to take that risk, it's not as much of a risk. I'm not quitting my job to go all out on something that may or may not work. I'm able to test things on the side. You know, I can test 3 or 4 or 5 different business ideas or side hustles, if you will, and then find one that works and then go all in on it once there's like a proven path. And so, I guess that being said, I'm curious if you could kind of walk us through what were the numbers of the acquisition? Like, how much did you acquire it for? And you know, let's start there, and then maybe we can even jump into how you knew it was time to quit Spiff. Because I'm interested
Sure.
in the numbers of, you know, because you walked us through it the other day, and it'd be cool to see like where you started and like how you've been able to grow.
Yeah. So, over 100,000 is what we actually acquired the business for and took over. A lot of that was inventory, right? Turf and the amount of inventory that he had, we had to take that on. But like, truthfully, we didn't know like there's not necessarily something you can tie a multiple to. Obviously, when we saw like how the business was being run and the opportunity of splitting them, both from like a service-based business as well as going upstream into supply, obviously you kind of naturally get excited. Okay, what could this be? How can we improve our margins? Like just starting to scale. And I admit, I was the beneficiary of leaning on the experience of my 2 other partners, right? And you bringing to the table my skill set and what I was good at the same time learning the ins and outs and how to look at improving things along the way, which still not there, but I feel like in the last 2 years where I was versus where I am now, it's like, yeah, like I'm very proud. I'm also like, feels like to your point, like never I've been more excited about waking up in the morning to go tackle the problems that I actually want to solve. Speaking kindly to a lot of people who have W-2s, right? Sometimes you go to work solving the problems of people above you, right? Which is fine. And in full transparency, I had always envisioned a life in sales, right? I was happy. I was doing really well. I made a lot more money at those tech companies than I currently do, and I'll get into like where I'm at today and obviously what's looming in the future into how there's obviously a greater return that can come from being an owner. But yeah, it's more fulfilling, if you will. Not that it's easier, not that it's for everybody, but if you have those means to where, again, you have a good W-2, we're using the W-2 word a lot, but you can explore and you can kind of put lines in different things, whether that's in investing or starting something on the side. If it, again, like things can take off, and I would say like Turf kind of took off. And but it's all because we kind of put things out there. There was things in motion, and sometimes you kind of hit something. And so everybody should be exploring if that's what they want to do. I forgot the question. So did I not answer the question?
No, you did. You're perfect. You're perfect. It just kind of quickly summarize. You guys bought it for over 100K. 1x sales is kind of what we talked about in our pre-call, just to kind of ballpark. So there was an opportunity here because businesses can go to 2 to 3 to 6 times the multiple depending on the size and revenue of that business. So there was opportunity. You guys saw that, and then you guys started growing it. And so just wanted to talk about scaling the business. Kind of 2 questions here. One, or kind of walk us through splitting the company into 2 companies. So like the turf installation and then the turf supplier, because it sounds like you kind of bought one thing that was kind of this fuzzy combination of both. And then walk us through the whole process of scaling, how that's been over the past 2.5 years. And then like, honestly, like turf to me, just, I know turf, I played lacrosse. It's what I played on. Like does turf change? Is there new technology? Like tell us just the ins and outs of the business and how it's scaled over the past 2.5 years.
Yeah, so I mentioned the install in the beginning of the story. He was a crucial part. His name's Tanner Brenneman, and obviously we wouldn't be anywhere where we are today without him. So when we were having these conversations, he was a big part in terms of coming on board with us in helping us scale out the install side. And the way that we did it, obviously, like, again, one of the fun things about being an entrepreneur or having partners for that matter is like the ability to like really change and bring people along with you. And so when we created the install company, We gave him equity of the company, paid him a little bit more, but also like allowed us to kind of be a little bit more hands off and allow that to grow and give him more responsibility to take on, while we were kind of getting the supply off the ground, if you will, right? Where we were actively, in terms of like scale, at the time when we bought the business, I think there was probably like 3, maybe 4 turf installation companies in the state of Utah. And then a little bit over like a year, we grew that number to about 20 different companies. So again, look at the LinkedIn. I post about it a lot in terms of like, hey, how can we help you start your own business? And if you're one of those readers, or maybe you're listening to that, like we preached and try to help people actually go out and learn how to install turf so they could, start their own business. It created some challenges, right? Not everybody knows the ins and outs about turf, but like we were willing to be different in that aspect. And again, as a supplier, if we can help get people to understand how to install turf, ultimately they might be more successful. They might land more jobs and be coming back to buy more supplies from us. The other question I get asked a lot is, well, Taylor, like you have an install company. Why are you trying to launch or help these other companies? Aren't they your competitors? And I think that's probably like a fundamental lesson that like any entrepreneur should learn, is like a lot of it can deal with perspective, to be honest with you, right? Like there's a famous quote, rising tide rises all ships, right? Or the more awareness or more people that are brought to turf, consumers are smart, right? They'll get bids from lots of companies. But if we can instill and help people install turf the right way, that's going to bring more awareness. That's going to bring neighbors to see turf. And, and that's exactly what happened. And part of like what's changed, so you mentioned you play lacrosse, right? I'm assuming when you played lacrosse, you had little rubber pellets inside of it, right? So that's the assumption. A lot of people are the lasting memory that's the memory that they have. A lot of people play sports and that's their first experience to turf, right? Well, that's field, that's sport turf. There's another whole line of this where it's like landscape turf, or things that you can utilize for pets. And so that was kind of my takeaway when they showed up literally on my doorstep with these samples. Is like, I had no idea. In my head, I used to think of turf as like that thin carpet stuff that was on my grandma's front porch. And so when I saw in terms of like the technology, the shapes, the heights, the way that it's installed using this like coated sand as infill to help cool the turf and help it last longer, that's kind of what we've taken on in the last few years, is trying to educate people on not only how far it's come, what the benefits are. There are different applications, there are different turfs for different applications. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's cool to hear about the growth. And Ty and I have both listened to podcasts of other regions throughout the U.S. that are growing in awareness with turf. And for some reason, it just seems like it's taking off, which is so weird because for me growing up, the only turf I ever played on was a soccer field when I was like 6 or something. And I don't even know if that was real turf or anything. But I even my in-laws in Arizona, they have turf at their place for landscaping because they hate cutting the grass. And so it's cool to see how it's growing in awareness. What I'm curious to hear from you is, you guys bought this at a really small company. There was not very many people doing this, and now all of a sudden it feels like it's grown a lot. I look back on your LinkedIn and you were featured in Utah Valley Business Magazine, spotlighted by American Credit Union with being able to spend some money for advertising with the Jazz, Fox News, 13. What's contributed to that growth? Because did you guys just strike gold with an up and coming trend, or I imagine there's some level of execution and business acumen that's gone along with that. But can you kind of help me understand, what did you do in the last 2.5, 3 years that has enabled you guys to be so successful with this venture?
Yeah, for whatever reason, I really like the podcast, like how I built this with Guy Raz, and dream one day to be on that podcast, whatever. But he always asks the question, like, what do you attribute to luck? What do you attribute to hard work? And in this scenario, it's always interesting to hear the responses from those people that are on those podcasts. I've thought through it myself, but truly, I think we were again, in life, a lot of times you can, that person got lucky, right? But there's a lot of things that happened along the way to prepare that luck to happen, if you will. And I think that's the same thing with us. Going back to a question you asked earlier in the, what translate, what did I take away from being a sales rep? Like a lot of the things in business is just trying to just work right. You don't have the answers in the beginning. I didn't know how to install turf, and yet day one I'm trying to tell people like, oh, yeah, do it this way. And I'm sure if I were to look back on some of those phone calls that I had, like I was just, I was spitting through my teeth. I don't know, right? But you learn as you go, and so I think a lot of that is with the opportunity presented itself, and we definitely took advantage of it through hard work, and a lot of that just has to do with just being persistent, doing things differently. Part of what's helped us get into these other companies that I mentioned earlier on is like, especially in the home services space, I get really excited about any type of business. And what I mean by that is like the barrier of entry is so low. I don't know if you or people listening have ever dealt with a contractor related to anything done on their home, right? Chances are the experiences haven't been great, right? Maybe slow to
Yep.
answer the phone. Maybe there's no communication. Maybe there's some shady
Yep.
business practice. Whatever it is, what does that tell you? It tells me there's opportunity to improve. And so literally, if you can just be professional, show up when you say you're going to show up, communicate, chances are you're better than half of the industry, and there's always going to be a market for you. And so again, we just saw those from past experiences and saw like, hey, when leads come in, we're going to call them. It's not going to take us 5 days to respond to them. It's going to be hopefully within like a minute or less. And obviously just always taking care of the customer, making sure that, again, if there's something coming up, like take care of it. And so far it's worked out.
That's awesome. There's a lot of tech things in there. And we talked about this in our pre-call. If you our in-home services can answer the phone on the first, or never miss a phone call and can get back to people in a timely fashion, you're probably toward the top, 95th percentile of all home services businesses. And so you've shown that and executed, right? You wrote an awesome tailwind of turf, but you executed. Not everyone has a massive turf company just because turf got popular. So you were able to execute and capitalize on the opportunity that was presented, which is awesome. So kind of wrapping up here, we have like a few more questions. Tell us where you guys are present day. Clay mentioned some of the highlights and some of the things that you guys have been noticed in, and you can see those on your LinkedIn. But we talked about where you guys bought it at. You don't have to get too specific with numbers, but I know you guys are building and thinking about an exit, in the far future, near future. Where are you guys at today, and what's kind of next for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's very humbling in terms of obviously we promote, I post a lot about the business and the successes or things that we're learning, opportunities that presented itself, right? Again, when you're doing things right, or again, as we think we're doing them the right way, opportunities come. So, yeah, we're trying to grow this thing. Who knows what happens? Maybe there's an acquisition, maybe there's partnerships, maybe there's other things on the path. But for right now, we're trying to execute. Right, we're coming up to what some may call is like like there's seasonality to our business. Right, it's really hard to install artificial turf on snow, and so right now we're working through how do we get turf into other markets, which has been fun and a fun problem to tackle. And we're working through those things, and obviously the revenue behind it's gone, right? We're doing really well, and hopefully we continue to grow that EBITDA, the fun term that everybody's familiar with and loves. So it's something on our minds, and with that we'll continue to invest. So we have the turf company, as I mentioned, that through the turf experience itself, it's opened my eyes to, well, golly, look, here's the blueprint. Let's go replicate it in other, types of services. And so, like I said, we just launched a deck company called Dynamic Deck Pros, and the hope is that we'll continue to either acquire or start from scratch these home service-based business, and again with our internal team, look to scale them and keep going.
Yeah, I appreciate the humility you have behind some of this, because I think you've definitely experienced some incredible stories, incredible companies you've been able to be a part of and help build out. And so it's great to hear for folks like us, what it was like going through that. And wrapping up, one of the questions that Ty and I really wanted to ask for everyone that's listening, that's Taylor, for perspective, people that are listening to this are probably making between 80, 150K a year. They've been in sales for 5 to 8 years. They're or they're looking to get into sales, but they really want to be in entrepreneurship, and maybe they don't know how that path works. And so we want to bring someone on like you to help show that. And my question to you is, what's your advice for that person? What that is using sales to get into entrepreneurship, and how? Yeah, what one piece of advice would you give them?
A couple of things that I try to probably just summarize that I've probably mentioned throughout the call today. Like one, like learn that everybody's self-interested, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just the reality. And that can apply to the salesperson themselves, right? You are self-interested. You're looking to take home a paycheck, get that big commission check, whatever it may be, right? And so just acknowledging to yourself that everybody, first and foremost, is probably going to be looking out for themselves. The other thing within that is like, yeah, I think drawing on my experience, but well, let me go find something that I'm passionate about and go all in, which you definitely can. But as I mentioned earlier, there's other things that, again, if it's not the full-on entrepreneur experience of actually going out and acquiring a business or starting from scratch, there are certain things that you can do within your own role, to be honest with you, right? Because if you think outside the box, or if you try to do something a little bit differently than what's the norm, well, what happens, right? That could lead to other opportunities within the organization. That could lead to a promotion. That could lead to a higher salary, whatever it may be. And then from there, with the extra or something on top, you're able to put into a type of investment or take that money and look to partner up with somebody. Like my experience is my experience. It's not the same for everybody. I was fortunate that there were partners involved and I can lean on them. I shared the financial risk. I shared a lot of the responsibilities. And as a team, we were able to grow and go that much quicker, that much faster. And I acknowledge that, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But I know for some people, they want to retain as much as they can, and growth might look a little slower. So whatever it is, I think for young, I have this conversation a lot with just different, younger people that I'm connected with is, again, if you're younger in your role, let's say maybe 20 to 25, 20 to 30, like this period of life, like I'm 34. So if I look back to maybe some of my years where I was either single or I had no kids, obviously this is the time in which, again, you can really bust your butt, right, and get ahead. And with the time that you may have or with the extra income that you may have, I'd encourage people to try. You never get anywhere without, like I said, making that phone call or doing this. Like I just set up a few registered with the state, these two other businesses that I mentioned. And I went through that experience knowing like, man, I understand why some businesses never get off the ground because of those freaking hoops that I had to go through just to get registered with the state or the EIN or changing it. Like understanding that like starting a business is hard, right? It's not the easiest thing, but by taking action, you'll never know if it's going to go anywhere. But along the way, whether it's a failed startup or a failed business plan, partnership, whatever it is, you can take away something good from it and apply it to the next thing. And so for anybody that has an entrepreneurial bone in them, I'd say go for it. And don't let the success or the failure of the first one stop you from pushing on and keep moving.
Awesome. We really appreciate your time here, and I mean this when I'm saying I'm not blowing smoke. Me and Clay really appreciate it, and it's inspiring for people that are in tech because it sometimes feels like something that's really hard to get out of, or you'll never get out of. So you have to find people that you can look up to and that you want to be like. And I genuinely mean it when I say like we want to follow in your path, and we appreciate you showing that there is a path of action that can lead to a more exciting future for you and your family if you're listening to this. So we really appreciate that. We'll let you go. We know we're taking just a ton of your afternoon with your kids, so we appreciate that. How can people connect with you if they're in Utah? How can they buy turf from you and get it in their backyard or a new deck? Just shout out all your different channels and we'll let you go.
I'm not like Deion Sanders. I'm not hard to find. LinkedIn. I'm active there. Taylor Brown. If you want to look at the companies, Elite Turf Supply on the web, Instagram, we'd love to connect. If there's any questions that people have as to how to get started or just anything that I can help with, I'm always here as a resource. Thanks you guys for having me.
We appreciate it, Taylor. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.